Chapter 301, Dilemma. Are you looking for him? Ecthelion asked. No, not really, Leeway replied. I just happened to be passing by and wanted to see how Thorongil is doing, but as you can see, I always just miss him. That's a pity, Ecthelion said, but as long as he is still in the world, their paths will cross. I know a little of his movements. After arriving at Pelargir, he crossed the Anduin and left Gondor through Ithilien. He may have gone south or perhaps east. Perhaps he discovered something and is going to make an in-depth exploration behind enemy lines. Ecthelion sighed, at a loss for words. He had no real complaint about Aragorn's unannounced departure. He simply found the young man unpredictably charming, doing whatever he pleased. Both friends and foes were startled by his sudden, bold actions. It's a shame I couldn't keep him, Ecthelion finally said. Hearing that and seeing Leeway, who seemed to have come only to find Thorongil, Denethor felt a tug of bitterness. Before Thorongil arrived, Denethor had been Gondor's most accomplished commander, praised as the most kingly Gondorian in 1,000 years. He had been proud of that. But when Thorongil came, everything changed. Though he resisted admitting it at first, Denethor had to acknowledge that this young man, barely a year his junior, was a military genius. Thorongil had quickly eclipsed him, becoming Ecthelion's favored confidant and winning the people's adoration. The affection and support Denethor had once enjoyed were taken away almost overnight. That sudden shift rankled the proud steward. It took him a long time to accept. Driven by that unease, Denethor had secretly looked into Thorongil's identity, and what he found unsettled him. My father, he thought, this man is no ordinary soldier. That gray wizard obviously intends him for the rule of Gondor. His feelings were complicated. Morally, perhaps the end of the Chancellor's rule would be for the best, but to face such a change personally, combined with so many small humiliations, left Denethor ill at ease. In the end, he felt no regret at Aragorn's departure. If anything, he was secretly relieved. All right, he told himself. If he left, he left. Everyone has their own ambitions. You cannot force a man to stay. Leeway's casual remark ended the subject. He turned to look at the tall, imposing figure beside them. And what of this commander of the White Tower? He asked. I've heard much about Denethor these last years. The commander of the White Tower, like the Marshal of Rohan, the officer who directly leads the capital's forces, was normally the office of the Chancellor's heir. He has done well, Ecthelion said. He is a man of accomplishment. A truly kingly Gondorian, Leeway agreed, patting the tall young man's shoulder. Whether Denethor or Aragorn, these Dunedain men were always taller than the last, often over 1.95 meters. With such stature, who among the enemy would not tremble to see them? A hulking figure half a meter taller than you, striding forward in armor with a sword and shield raised and a cry on his lips, terrifying. Denethor, taken aback by the sudden change of subject, hesitated for a moment. Then he straightened and received the praise with a calm temper. Leeway watched him and felt something like warmth. Perhaps it was his imagination, but Denethor seemed brighter than before. Reunions after long separation left their mark on people. Come here, little fellow, Leeway said with a grin. I know you must have missed me. Give your uncle a hug. He opened his arms. The abruptness of it flustered both Denethor and Ecthelion. Denethor, now over 40 and marked by the strain of years of duty, almost choked on the statement. He lowered his head and protested quickly. You must know I am no longer a little fellow, Uncle Leeway. I have seen fire and blood, valleys of poisonous miasma. I have ridden at the head of the troops and felt the keen edge of swords and spears. I know all that, Leeway said, smiling. But to me you'll always be that green youth. Have you forgotten? When you were small, I even... No, you didn't. I refused then. Oh, did you? It doesn't matter. No matter how much time passes, to me you are still a child. Come on, let your uncle give you a hug. Leeway stepped closer. No, wait. I said no. Denethor backed away, casting a pleading look toward the doorway. Ecthelion laughed awkwardly twice, but did not move to intervene. Father, why are you only watching? Denethor must have wondered inwardly. The reception room was suddenly noisy with suppressed laughter. A moment later, Denethor left, looking uncomfortable. The embrace had been too literal. Leeway had forgotten to take off his armor. The dragonfire tempered steel of his cuirass retained heat. Anyone who hugged him unprepared felt it. Only the dwarves could embrace Leeway without flinching when he forgot to change. Denethor's steps, however, were somehow lighter as he went. Seeing that, his father Ecthelion smiled and sipped his tea. No one knows a son better than a father, and no one knows a subject better than his lord. Ecthelion was both father and ruler. He had watched Denethor's state through the years, and he did not show favoritism simply because Denethor was his son. His warmth toward Aragorn spoke to that impartiality. When Denethor had left, Leeway settled back at the table and resumed idly chatting with Ecthelion. Their talk ranged over south and north, east and west, an easy, comfortable reunion. Not long after the Pelargir fleet returned in triumph, Aragorn had made his own choices. East of Pelargir, at the border of southern Ithilien and Harland, he had abandoned his small boat and set foot on land. His time in Rohan and Gondor was over. He now headed south and east. Alone, he meant to walk the wilds, to see the hearts of men and to probe for signs of Sauron's designs. He hoped to discover whatever he could of enemy schemes and to gather useful information. As he started that solitary journey through the Harland wilds, memories rose in his mind. He had heard how Uncle Leeway had fought those parts before, driving the commanders of the Harlan River Basin to their knees and forcing them to withdraw, all to cover the retreat of a company of Gondor rangers. Aragorn smiled at the thought. In a way, he was following in those same footsteps. Tales of that man turned up wherever he went. Chapter 302, Tradition Whoosh. After half a month of hard travel, a river finally appeared before them. Aragorn looked across the water. The name rose in his mind, the Harlan River. Whether Harlan still claimed it or not might be disputed, but there was no doubt this river marked the border of Harad. Beyond it lay Harad's lands. That was precisely why the Haradrim cared so much about both banks. They even had a specific post named for it, the Harnan Commander. A commander. Aragorn had killed one before. He pulled his hood down and melted into the column. A few days later, something unusual was happening around the Harnan Commander's tent. Clang! A stout staff of Malorn wood intercepted a sword thrust aimed at the commander. Aragorn's eyes widened at the sight of that kind of staff. He turned and saw an old man in blue robes who had appeared silently and stood staring at him with sharp eyes. "You know this sort of staff?" the old man asked, and at the same time reached out to steady the young Harnan commander behind him, who was sweating and about to draw his sword. "Of course I do." Aragorn kept a wary grip on his blade as he watched the two figures opposite him. "Don't be nervous, young Dunedain." The man in the blue robe sheathed his staff and inclined his head. "I am LOTR, a wizard. A wizard is a wizard. I don't suppose I need to explain what that means." Aragorn's hand did not relax from the hilt. "I know of your people. He was a great Dunedain warrior. He once bested the Ringwraiths. I remember him well." "Oh, there was another present then," LOTR replied. "His name was Leeway." At that name, Aragorn's chest loosened. "You know Uncle Leeway?" "Uncle? Yes, of course. We're sworn brothers." LOTR's voice took on a touch of feeling. In his mind, he added wryly that Leeway had nearly beaten him to death in those days. With LOTR's words, Aragorn finally relaxed enough to sheath his sword. "What exactly is happening here?" he asked. LOTR stepped aside and indicated the young Harnan commander with a nod. "Don't worry, he's one of us. His father once swore fealty to Leeway, and that oath has been passed down." The young commander inclined his head in greeting. Aragorn returned the gesture slowly. LOTR and Aragorn sat and began to talk. LOTR admitted he hadn't seen Leeway in decades and did not know how he fared. Aragorn told him that Leeway seemed to be doing very well, perhaps surprisingly so. "Do you know the Lord of the North?" Aragorn asked at one point. LOTR frowned. "No, I've been tied up here for years. I haven't been north, and I've heard nothing of him." Aragorn, surprised by the unfamiliar title, asked LOTR to tell him what he knew. Their conversation ran long. LOTR listened with interest and finally sighed. "I would love to see it with my own eyes one day, but there is so much I still must do here. Next, I plan to go to the Far East. The Khan's old king has died, and his son now rules. I don't yet know what that will bring." "And you?" LOTR asked Aragorn. Aragorn hadn't expected the question from this newly met wizard. "To be honest, I'm homesick. Having a Dunedain nearby stirs many memories." He considered the south and how aimless lingering there felt. especially after his recent trouble with a port commander and the tension in Umbar. When LOTR mentioned the Far East, Aragorn nodded. It was a reasonable course. The two reached an understanding. They would travel east together. Thus, the blue-robed wizard and the unremarkable-seeming Dunedain set out on a new journey. In the White City's audience chamber, Ecthelion produced a weathered notebook and handed it to Li Wei. Li Wei took it and was instantly struck by a rush of memory. It was as if he had been transported back decades to the early days when the first school at Roadside Fort had been founded. Tabor had still been alive then. It had been a warm afternoon. He and Tabor had walked the schoolyard, idly grading the students' homework. Li Wei had written many notes in the margins, and Tabor had come to him later with questions about some of them. Everything felt fresh, as if it had happened yesterday. He shook himself and opened the aged notebook. His own annotations stared back at him, and then, in a different hand, Tabor's marginalia. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Ecthelion explained. Some time ago, his captain of the guard had rescued a ranger from Roadside Fort who had been out on an errand. The ranger had been deeply grateful and had told the captain he could keep anything upon him. The captain, Ecthelion said, had not intended to take anything, but the notebook had fallen from the ranger's things and its origin had been recognized. In the end, the captain had chosen to keep it. Ecthelion lowered his voice. The child, the captain had said, had been very strong. He had suffered multiple broken bones and grave injuries, but not once cried out. Yet when the notebook was taken from him, he had almost broken down. Still, the captain had brought it back to the White City. Li Wei stared at the book, puzzled. Why would someone want a notebook like this? To many people, it is priceless, Ecthelion replied without surprise. You don't know how many offered high sums to secure it before it reached me. In a way, it is an authentic Lord's work, 30 years in the making. Li Wei smiled ruefully. Let me take it. I will give you something in exchange. He knew how important such a thing could be to the one who had lost it, perhaps a family heirloom or a trusted token. To have it restored would mean much. Keep it. Think of it as me returning a lost item to your people, Li Wei offered. No. Ecthelion shook his head. We cannot take good deeds for granted. Li Wei considered a moment, then set about composing a replica of the general history of Roadside Fort. He copied it by hand, stamped his private emblem across it, and added a note of thanks. He tucked inside the book a small red flower and a heavy, finely made gold coin embossed with the Roadside Fort emblem. By this token, he told Ecthelion, anyone who holds it may enlist aid from any of the Free City states. Ecthelion examined the book, the coin, and the flower, clearly intrigued. You still keep such a tradition? We didn't, Ecthelion began, then fell silent. Li Wei leaned back and smiled. Now we do. Thanks to Qingfen for the 288-point reward, and thanks to everyone who voted. Thank you. This volume is nearly complete. Chapter 303, Many Years. In the year 2973, Li Wei traveled to Rohan and Gondor and met with two old friends. That same year, Gondor's commander, Thorongil, led a raid on the port of Umbar, burning scores of ships and killing the port's commander, greatly lessening the threat from the southern seas. Everyone knew of the deed, but what puzzled people was that after achieving such glory, Thorongil vanished without a word and never reappeared in public. It was the same in Rohan. People remembered a gifted young general who had fought at Grand Marshal Theoden's side and defended the borders with fearless courage. Many tried to find the gray-robed wizard who always accompanied the young general, his teacher and friend, but the wizard's whereabouts proved even more mysterious than Thorongil's. In the end, people gave up. Even so, Thorongil's disappearance didn't erase the memory of the extraordinary young man who had done so much for the Free Peoples. His deeds would be written down and passed on. Years slid by. People went their own ways, never knowing what lay at the end of the road. In recent years, Li Wei hardly traveled at all. He spent most of his time within his territories, above all in River Valley City, where he could often be seen. River Valley City had become his preferred residence. His houses in Roadside Fort and the riverside stronghold in the City of Water stood empty for long stretches. The people of those lands had grown used to their lord's absences. Over time, through education and institutional reforms, the territories learned to run themselves. A mature operational model was in place. Even without leeway, the lands could prosper and would continue to grow. The difference was that when he was present, development sometimes leapt forward in major ways, building the Great Wall, launching the City of Water project. When he was absent, things remained steady. For the people, it was enough that Li Wei stayed peacefully within his domain for long stretches, no matter which residence he favored. River Valley City, Roadside Fort, City of Water, the time to travel between them was never so long that news could not be carried promptly. Another winter arrived. Cloaked against the cold, Li Wei walked along familiar streets, answering the occasional greeting. Snow fell lightly, melting on his cloak before it reached him. He knocked on a familiar door. Inside, movement was slower than it used to be. Bard opened it with a creak and welcomed him in. Bard coughed twice, settled at the table, and pushed a steaming cup of tea toward Li Wei. The weather was growing harsher. "How have things been lately?" Li Wei asked. "All as usual. Quite good," Bard replied, then fell silent. Li Wei studied the white hair and thin frame of the older man and remained quiet for a long moment. A second knock came at the door. Li Wei went to open it. "Bane and Brand," he greeted as he stepped aside. He changed into armor at the door and scooped the lively little Brand into his arms. The boy, 4 or 5 years old, was at that age when curiosity and mischief were boundless. He behaved well, though, whenever Bard or Li Wei were near. "Good boy. Have some snacks," Bard said with a smile and handed him a soft biscuit. "Thank you, Grandpa," Brand said, taking it with big, watery eyes and nibbling in small bites. Bard stroked his hair with a face full of affection and a touch of reluctance. Li Wei sat by the window facing Bard, while Bane sat at the side of the table with Brand in his lap. "There's a new bridge east of Grand Road Town," Bane reported. "It'll make travel to Dorwinion easier." "Nothing to report at the border. No activity," another added. "This year's been peaceful." Bard nodded as he listened to Bane's concise summary. He was no longer fit for complicated tasks or for personally inspecting construction sites or border posts. Those duties had passed naturally to Bane, who was doing an excellent job, no worse than Bard himself. "You'll look after this country for me, won't you?" Bard said with a small smile. "Father," Bane began, "if you want to see, go and see. Nothing convinces like your own eyes," Bard interrupted, but Li Wei cut in before the conversation could deepen. Brand looked up, puzzled by the sudden change of subject. The prosperity of the region, Li Wei knew, could not be separated from his own influence, but Bard's hand had been crucial as well. Only when Li Wei finally settled here and paid attention did he grasp the true state of the river valley, the good relations with Lonely Mountain, the free and smooth trade along the running river, the flourishing towns. Much of that came from Li Wei's name and the opportunities he had created, but Bard's management mattered as much. When Roadside Fort was founded, people went there because they had heard a legend would give shelter and a fresh start. Yet a great many others had come not only because of Li Wei, but because Bard's personal charisma and the policies he enacted moved them. As an acting deputy, Lord Bard spread wealth, improved lives, kept strong ties with different factions, and raised the prestige of River Valley, the Free City States, and even Li Wei among allies. Across that wide territory, Li Wei had never had to worry. That winter, as the new year came and went, Li Wei spent his time in River Valley City. Simple days, gatherings, displays of skill, visits with old friends. Bard and Bane's family were his closest. At their table, they enjoyed the dishes Li Wei had prepared, laughing and eating happily. Little Brand saw more good food than he'd seen before, and nearly ate himself into a stupor. Glasses clicked sharply as they toasted, and everyone drank. When the meal ended and Li Wei took his leave, Bard returned to his desk. He poured a cup of tea, picked up a pen, and tried to write in his notebook, but the words wouldn't come. He stopped, shook his head, sighed, and leaned back, closing his eyes to rest. Spring arrived as usual, bringing new life and prosperity to the land. At the start of the year, Li Wei received a letter signed by Denethor. "I have fallen in love with a gentle and beautiful woman." The opening line took him by surprise. He put the letter down, looked at the signature again. It was indeed Denethor, and read on. Denethor poured his heart out in a way Li Wei would never have imagined from a man usually as stern as iron. He wrote in earnest about their time together, the moments that won him over, and how he had come to love her. It was proof that love changes people. But the main point of the letter was practical. Denethor was to be married, Finglas, the daughter of Prince Adrahil of Dal Amroth, and he hoped Liwei would attend the celebration and share in his joy. Liwei smiled to himself. He had no intention of spoiling Denethor's happiness. Time, however, had flown. It seemed only yesterday the boy had been as tall as Liwei's waist, serious, and always frowning like a tiny man. Years later, in 2976 of the Third Age, Gondor's White City hosted a grand wedding. Denethor shut his hair back, donned a black suit with white cuffs, examined himself in the mirror, and nodded in satisfaction. Finglas appeared in a white veil, her black hair shining, taller than most women, and perfectly matched to Denethor's stature. Their eyes held deep affection. Musicians played romantic strains as they exchanged rings before thousands, promising themselves to one another. Applause thundered. Denethor, proud and solemn, walked with Finglas on his arm along a path strewn with flowers, passing relatives and guests. Among them, Liwei stood in a conspicuous spot, smiling and applauding. Ecthelion, Denethor's father, and many of Gondor's dignitaries were present as well. Denethor returned Liwei's smile, his hand resting unconsciously on the iron sword at his waist, even on such an occasion. The ceremony ended with a kiss, and later, as the evening banquet wound down, Denethor found himself alone at a window, swirling wine in his goblet and lost in thought. "What's wrong?" Finglas asked, coming up behind him and wrapping her arms around him. Denethor took her hand and let a sliver of his true feelings show. "I can't help feeling I haven't quite earned this recognition yet, that maybe I'm not as worthy as I imagine." "Why would you think that?" Finglas looked at him with concern. He only shook his head, and the subject passed. They stood together in the quiet, savoring the warmth. "This happiness feels so fragile," he admitted. "I wish it could last forever." "I will always be at your side," she promised softly. They said no more, simply allowing themselves to enjoy the moment. Some live in light and happiness, others walk alone in darkness. In the depths of Moria, Gandalf brought the gem at the tip of his staff alight so he could see the way ahead. The wizard rarely did anything without reason. Choosing to forgo the easier routes, the roads through Isengard or the High Road, and enter Moria was not a choice made for danger's sake alone. Rumors said the Great Wars had cleared Moria of evil decades ago, but Gandalf distrusted such simple assurances. He had come to see for himself. The halls and tunnels of Moria were complex. Even with no creatures stirring, the terrain could threaten a traveler. Not everyone could be like Liwei, who could simply pick a direction and dig his way through if needed. The silence in the vast underground corridors worked on Gandalf. He felt an uneasy sense of being watched by countless unseen eyes. As he hesitated at a fork, a light flickered in the distance. Was it a fire? He snuffed his staff's glow and advanced cautiously. Around the corner, a campfire burned, and beside it a carved emblem, Liwei. The name made Gandalf smile. The tension melted away. This was one of Liwei's campfires, the kind that burned steadily without fuel, neither fierce nor faint, like the first fire Liwei had made at Behi River Bend. Gandalf sat by it, drank from his waterskin, wrapped himself in his robe, and dozed for a short time, warmed by the steady glow and lulled by its thin crackle. He left his own mark beside Liwei's, a Tengwar G, partly to note his passing, partly to signal to others that this spot was safe, certified by the Grey Wizard. The rest of his passage through Moria proved uneventful. Roads bore other campfires and marks Liwei had left. The maze felt too easy, almost boring. Emerging from Moria's west gate, Gandalf shook his head at the lack of excitement. He lifted his gaze to the distant water city on the horizon, decided on his next destination, and set off along the ancient elven road that stretched before him, humming as he walked. Chapter 305, Death. The spring that year never felt warm. Whether from overwork or some lingering illness, Bard suddenly collapsed. Bane fed him milk and a healing potion, but it did little good. Bard slept the whole day. When he woke, he ate only a little. His condition worried them, but after that he settled into a steady, if quiet, routine. He seemed fine, though often, when Liwei dropped by, he would see Bard pick up a pen as if to write, and then set it down without putting anything on the page. On one of those gray afternoons, Li Wei produced a golden apple, trying to brighten the mood. Bard smiled at the unprompted gift and declined. I'm not ill, not injured, he said. I just need more rest. He sighed, suddenly heavy with feeling. An era is coming to an end, Li Wei. I can feel it, Li Wei answered. I stand on both an ending and a beginning. It's been an honor to see it all with my own eyes, Bard said. Li Wei opened his mouth and found no words. The house was quiet, and then, knock knock, the door opened. Bane had come, and Brand with him. For once the father and son stayed for a calm afternoon tea. Bane sat at the side of the table, quietly keeping watch. Little Brand was as lively as ever. He hugged his grandfather, exchanged a few words, greeted Li Wei, allowed himself 2 affectionate pats on the head, and then scampered off to play. It felt ordinary and whole, exactly as it had been. When they left, Bard stood at the doorway and watched them go, smiling. That smile held kindness and joy and pride, and a kind of release. He returned to the table and leaned back in his chair. We did it, Li Wei, he said. Li Wei looked up. What do you mean? Decades ago, I said that if people loved their homeland more than they loved gold and power, the world would be better. Is it like that now? Li Wei paused, then nodded slowly. Bard's smile softened as he looked at the empty teacup before him. I'm a bit thirsty, he said. Would you pour me a cup? I've always been the one to pour for you. Let me be a little selfish and be served for once. Of course. Li Wei took the kettle off the hearth and brewed fresh tea. I don't want to say goodbye, Bard murmured. He closed his eyes as the water hissed and the teacup filled. Steam curled up from the cup. Bard did not open his eyes again. Li Wei set the teapot on the table, sat in the opposite chair, and stared out the window. He stayed motionless for a long time, like a statue. A memory returned, years immediately after the Battle of the 5 Armies, when River Valley was still being rebuilt. A child running along the roadside had given him a small handmade gift, a little box with a pull string that opened both wrapper and box, and inside perhaps a candy. A young bard had explained the toy and then, with a seriousness that had stuck in Li Wei's mind, told him, if everyone valued their homeland more than gold and power, this world would be much better. Li Wei had stopped him from spoiling the surprise and had tucked the tiny box into his pack. He had kept it for decades. In the year 2977, Bard the Bowman, acting Lord of River Valley and Rovanian, passed away. Under his guidance, the territory had flourished, prosperous, peaceful, steadily growing. On the last day of that year, heavy snow blanketed the roofs. Bane came to the same house and the same table to see Li Wei. I'll go make tea, he said, rising quickly as if afraid to be a moment too late. You've done well, Li Wei told him, lifting his cup to offer encouragement. After Bard's death, the people of River Valley Town had recommended and elected Bane to take up his father's responsibilities. The title was modest in name, but the office carried weight. One might compare it to Gondor's chancellor. Bane protested that he was only doing what was right, but his voice was distant, blank with fatigue. He had not seen his uncle since the funeral. This visit was rare. The room was unchanged, but the chair opposite Li Wei remained empty. The door opened, and Brand came back in with a pile of pastries. Good lad, Bane said, ruffling the boy's hair until it was a mess. Brand's clear young eyes held a puzzled softness as he reached to sit in his grandfather's seat. Bane gently pulled him away and placed a small chair beside himself. Brand obeyed without complaint. Don't worry too much, Li Wei said, patting the boy's head. Outside, winter deepened. As Li Wei walked through Long Lake Town on his way out, he saw a familiar, hunched figure sitting on the steps of the mayor's office. Alfred. The old man stared at the frozen surface of the lake, lost in thought. Once he might have strode into the market and howled his grief aloud, invoking "My Lord," so that everyone would know his sorrow. Now he sat alone in a quiet corner, withdrawn and small. Li Wei didn't disturb him. He turned away from the wooden house, drew a deep breath, and let it out slowly. He closed his eyes and waited for another year to come. Chapter 306, New Beginnings. The settlements along the river valley continued as they always had, busy and full of life by day, warm lantern glow at night to keep travelers from stumbling. Banners bearing the sword and bow emblem hung at the gates of River Valley City, advertising its history to any who passed. It looked the same as ever, and yet this year the sight carried a different weight. Among the older generation, the banners stirred a tender nostalgia. In 2978, Theoden had written Li Wei a letter of thanks. That year, his son Theodred had been born, though Theoden's wife had nearly died in childbirth. A team of roadside fort rangers passing through Rohan's capital had rushed to help, and with the aid of healing potions, saved both mother and child. Li Wei read the letter and realized with a start, Theoden's started a family. The king had never mentioned his marriage or the birth. Well, there had been a hint of news before, but Li Wei had not been in the mood to follow it at the time. After mulling it over, Li Wei straightened himself and went out again, strolling through Rohan and then Gondor. Another surprise awaited him. In the same year as Theoden's child, Denethor's first son had been born, Boromir. In the steward's chamber of Minas Tirith, holding the infant, Denethor looked almost helplessly happy. The stern lines of his face softened into an awkward, careful expression, and his large hands cradled the baby as though he were handling a delicate dish, an action his wife Finduilas and the elder Li Wei gently scolded him for, then showed him the proper way to hold a child. When Finduilas left with Boromir, Denethor stood there nearly sweating. "Did you see him?" he said to Li Wei. "This is my son, Boromir, my firstborn." He stared toward the corner where his wife had gone and murmured to himself, lost in thought. He will grow, learn to stand, to speak, from an infant to a youth, and then on until he is stronger than I. Perhaps one day I will stoop, my shoulders will slope, my steps less quick. But as long as I can open my eyes, as long as I can still look upon my child, as long as my hands have some strength left, I will watch him. I will watch him walk ahead of me and turn to wave, and I will answer him. It was the simple, shattering love of a father. The prouder and stronger a man, the more completely he could be undone by such tenderness. If that man were later to learn terrible news about his child while his country tottered toward ruin, what despair would not take hold? Li Wei patted Denethor on the shoulder, a small comfort and encouragement. Denethor welcomed his guest and allowed him near the baby, but he was not so open with everyone. Soon after Li Wei left, a gray-robed figure shuffled up, Gandalf. "My congratulations, Denethor Sect, son of Ecthelion the Sec," he said with a dry chuckle. "May your son grow strong and healthy." Denethor answered politely but did not invite the wizard in. Influenced by Ecthelion, Gondor as a whole treated Gandalf with courtesy. The steward nevertheless harbored little fondness for the wizard and for Aragorn, whose presence and identity had long rankled him. Gandalf noticed, but there was nothing to be gained by pressing the matter. He sighed softly and continued on his way, used to being disliked, accustomed to being misunderstood and blamed. Other journeys were drawing to a close. In 2980, a dust-covered figure waved farewell to LOTR at the border of Dorwinion, passed the Rovanian outpost, and rode for Lothlorien. At the Golden Wood's edge, beneath the watchful boughs of the border guards, Aragorn removed his hood and spoke to the sentries in Elvish. Recognized as a friend, he was welcomed in. On an ancient hill in the heart of Lothlorien, Aragorn met Arwen. She stood dressed in a shimmering white gown, silver ornaments catching the light like a star made flesh. Aragorn was struck mute by her beauty. There, on that venerable hill, he took off the ring of Barahir and offered it to her. They pledged themselves to one another, to stay together for life. Years since their first meeting had finally yielded this step forward. Though long apart, they had grown closer still. The Golden Forest remained tranquil, its peace untroubled. Far from such light, a small, furtive creature scurried under the cover of night. Gollum darted away from several rangers, muttering to himself. He was not well allowed among men. For years, rangers had seen him in the wild and treated him as a curious, ugly little thing. No threat, no prize. They left him be. Gollum survived by fishing, snaring rabbits, stealing eggs, an oddity of the woods, an occasional story. This year, driven by some dark intuition or by the faint calls he had heard, Gollum traveled south through the Brown Lands, left the free city-states, crossed into Ithilien, and then pushed on eastward into shadowed ranges. He found a gap in the Shadow Mountains south of Minas Morgul. Here, it seemed, one might slip into Mordor. He had not reckoned on Shelob. The great spider lay in the dark, and when she made herself known, Gollum wailed, "No, don't eat us. We're so thin, Gollum, we can find you more food." Shelob paused, alert at the promise of more prey. So a reckless bargain was struck. Gollum began to lure orcs and other creatures within reach, bringing sustenance to Shelob in exchange for his life. For a time they coexisted in that grim alliance, unknown to the living who dwelt in the light. And beneath brighter skies, ordinary lives went on. In Hobbiton, below Bag End, a neat row of hobbit holes looked out upon Bagshot Row. Number 1 was Bilbo's Bag End. 2 doors down, at number 3, lived the Gamgees, gardeners famed for their tender care of flowers. Bilbo entrusted the garden at Bag End to Hamfast Gamgee. Today Hamfast did not go to work. His son had been born. Bilbo donned his coat and hurried across the street to offer his congratulations. The child's name was Sam, Samwise Gamgee. Chapter 3:7, A Restless Family. That morning, Bilbo greeted his gardener Sam and offered his warmest blessings. "What a fat little fellow. He'll grow up strong," he said, smiling as he patted the baby's round cheek. After he'd finished his good wishes, Bilbo turned to go back into Bag End, but an odd little sigh escaped him. Looking at the slightly loose skin on the back of his hand, he felt, with a sudden, small ache, how he was no longer young. He was alone, living by himself in Bag End, quiet, leisurely, and roomy. He shook his head to clear the thought, settled into his rocking chair, watched the sun slide toward the western hills, and said in his usual cheery voice, "The weather today is exceptionally clear." The Brandywine folk agreed. It was indeed a jolly day in that part of the Shire. That evening a feast was held at Brandy Hall, and as one of the hobbits with the greatest appetites, Drogo Baggins would not miss it. He went with his wife Primula and their son, and the family ate and drank and had a fine time. 12-year-old Frodo joined the other children and played until he dropped, and when he got home, he tumbled into bed and fell asleep at once. Frodo slept. His parents did not. Drogo and Primula sat together, watching the clear sky, until the moon rose and an idea struck them both. "Let's go boating," Drogo said in a mock poetic voice, cheeks flushed from the ale. "Look how lovely the Brandywine is by moonlight. If I could take one turn on it, my dreams would be full of pretty things." He had certainly had too much to drink, and his wife too. "Let's go now," Primula agreed. They left Frodo at home and went down to the river, singing and laughing as they put out in a little boat. They danced and joked until the boat overturned. "Help!" Their screams cut the night and startled the reeds. 2 rangers on the bank heard the cries. They saw the capsized boat and the 2 round shapes floundering in the water. They plunged in and hauled Drogo and Primula from the river. The couple clung to each other on the bank, wailing and shivering. The rangers lay on the grass, exhausted and dripping, whether from water or perspiration it was hard to tell. News of the near disaster spread quickly. The Shire is a small, quiet place where such things travel from house to house by dawn. "Boats are dangerous things," said Hamfast Gamgee, Sam's father, the gaffer, when he and Bilbo talked it over. "Lucky there were rangers about, or Frodo might have been an orphan at 12. Bilbo felt the same wash of relief. The thought of it made him shake his head. Serves them right, though. Not young folk, yet they leave their child alone and go boating. He rubbed his chin. I ought to go have words with them, as Drogo's cousin. He could not keep still after that thought. A few days later, Bilbo took his stick and set off eastward toward Brandywine Bridge. Drogo was no spring chicken. He was 72. Drogo had been 60 when Frodo was born. Primula was 12 years younger. Bilbo himself was a long-lived hobbit, 90 now, one of the oldest in the Shire, but he still had a lively spirit. Still, age tells, and the walk lasted the whole afternoon. By evening, winded, he sat down to rest on the riverbank near the Brandywine. He had hardly relaxed when a distant cry came floating across the water. "Help!" Bilbo sprang up and peered across the river. 3 savage dogs were racing along the far bank after a small figure. He squinted and saw it was Frodo, running as fast as his legs would carry him, pursued by the hounds. "Child, this!" Bilbo shouted and ran across the bridge toward him. Frodo, at the sound of the familiar voice, scrambled toward Bilbo and clutched his coat. "Uncle, quick, run!" "Don't be afraid, little one." Bilbo put Frodo behind him and planted his walking stick between them and the hounds. He raised his voice and his stick. "You mangy curs, off with you! I've faced a dragon. Do you think you frighten me? Go on, skulk away like dogs." For once his boldness seemed to have the desired effect. The 3 fierce dogs barked hesitated, and then slunk back the way they had come. When they were gone, Bilbo crouched and examined Frodo. The boy's feet were caked in mud, his sleeve torn, his face streaked with dirt. He trembled and could hardly stand. "It's all right, child. Tell your uncle what happened." Frodo uncurled his small, dirty hand and showed 2 mushrooms. Bilbo's face fell. "Those are Farmer Maggot's mushrooms. Did you take them from his patch?" Frodo nodded. "You little scamp." Bilbo tapped his head, helpless. Farmer Maggot's mushrooms were famous in the neighborhood, and Farmer Maggot kept 3 large dogs to guard them. He was right to protect his crops, and yet Bilbo's heart went out to the frightened boy. "Come along, then," Bilbo said at last. "I was on my way to visit your house anyway." He lifted Frodo onto his back, and they set off east through the growing dusk. After a while, Frodo, comforted, asked from behind, "Uncle, you said you once faced a dragon. Was that true?" Bilbo's eyes brightened. He could not resist. "Aye, true enough. In Erebor, the lost dwarf kingdom, I, Bilbo Baggins, and Gandalf and Thorin, the king under the mountain, went against a great dragon as tall as a windmill when it reared up." He told what he could of his adventures, and Frodo listened, wide-eyed, imagining it all. "You even knew Gandalf?" Frodo asked, remembering the rangers who had once saved his parents. "Yes, he came to see me on the day you were born, but more of that another time." Soon they reached the Baggins place. "Frodo, where on earth did you wander off to? We were frantic." Drogo and Primula ran out and wrapped the boy in frantic hugs. Bilbo, a little breathless and greatly relieved, scolded with affection. "Come inside. We have a good deal to talk about. Your parents and their boating, and you and Farmer Maggot's mushrooms." Chapter 308. Moving Forward. Frodo's parents had been rescued. He would not be an orphan after all. Leeway leaned back as he listened to the ranger's report and felt a weight lift from his chest. Yes, he had sent those 2 rangers, but it wasn't only because of him that the Shire was safer this year. For many years, Roadside Fort's influence had reached into the Shire, and it had become natural for rangers to be stationed there permanently. Part of their duty was to watch the approaches to the fort, part was to counter-reconnoiter for spies Saruman might plant and to prevent mischief. Quietly, almost without people knowing, they had always helped keep the Shire safe. It just so happened that Leeway's mention made them pay extra attention to that river this year. Had it not been for Zhuo and his wife falling in, most hobbits would never have known rangers were active in their fields and lanes. In the end, though, the result was what mattered, one fewer tragedy. Life continued, day after day, along its own path. For Leeway, accustomed to a more leisurely life, this year had not been peaceful. Sengel was failing. When Leeway reached Rohan, the king could scarcely open his eyes. Sengel sat in the great hall on his throne, eyes filled with memories as he looked at Leeway, who had not aged. "What I miss most are the journeys we took together," the old king chuckled hoarsely. "Especially the trouble we used to cause in this very hall." Seeing Sengel laugh with such effort, Leeway was at a loss for words. He no longer offered a golden apple or a healing potion as he had so many times before. He had done it until he was refused. Some things simply could not be fixed. People said Sengel possessed a panacea that could cure any illness and healing magic that could mend a broken neck. It was true, up to a point. But life itself was not an illness or an injury. It could not be arrested. Sitting on the steps beside the throne, Leeway sighed with the old man. "I miss those journeys too," he said softly. The laughter faded. Sengel's voice grew thin. "You know, I've always wanted to taste your soup again." Leeway opened his mouth, but Sengel hurried on, a half-joking reproach in his tone. "I know my soup was awful. I know you actually poured that bowl away that day. It broke my heart, but I understood. Sometimes people are just not good at certain things." Sengel smiled wryly. "I made soup many times after that, but only my wife and I ever drank it." "Ah, Moen," he added. "Only she would tolerate my temper and my nonsense." "I'm going before her," he said, more quietly, "but at least we have our children. Moen will not be alone." Leeway stared at the floor and said nothing. The hall fell quiet. Then Sengel caught his breath and with a faint smile added, "I did manage to improve the recipe a bit. It might just be passable now, but I won't have another chance to make it." Outside, footsteps stirred. "Theoden and Moen are here," someone murmured. "Let me speak with them again." Li Wei rose, leaving the last moments to Sengel's family. As he stepped out the door, a voice followed behind him. "Goodbye, old friend." "Goodbye, old friend," Li Wei echoed. Sengel's wife and children brushed past him and re-entered the great hall. Li Wei did not hear what they said. A few heart-wrenching cries soon rose from within. He paused, took a long breath, and turned away. Silent and still, he left. In the year 2980, Sengel, the 16th king of Rohan, died. Under his reign, Rohan had prospered and had never known foreign invasion. Theoden succeeded him as the 17th king. Please wait. Just outside the Golden Hall, as Li Wei was about to depart, a palace guard ran up holding a bowl. "This is what King Sengel left for you," he said, solemn. Li Wei took the steaming bowl, sniffed the vapor, and a small smile tugged at his mouth. It seemed Sengel really had tried to make it better. He tilted his head back and swallowed it in one long gulp. Pfft. He spat it out. He had been fooled after all. Time moved on. Days blurred into one another. Whenever Li Wei looked up at the sky, he would stand there for a long time, feeling a strange unreality. A year seemed to pass in the time of a single meal, and if he slept now, he might wake 7 or 8 years later. There is a saying that the deepest impression is the first one. Li Wei had once wondered why elves, when they met a certain dwarf or man, often spoke of an ancestor first, as if they knew only the forebear and not the living person. Gandalf, too, was guilty of this, always looking to the past rather than to the present. Now Li Wei understood. When he saw Theoden, the face of Sengel, and of that notorious old man Fengel before him, rose first in his mind. When he looked at Denethor, he thought first of Ecthelion and even of Turgon, whom he had known earlier. When he met Bane or Brand, Bard came to mind. Those from the previous era, or more accurately, those of Li Wei's own time, had left too deep an imprint. He had shared so much with them that, even after many years, his image of their families remained dominated by those individuals. The younger generation had their own stories, but Li Wei was not part of them. Time had blurred. It felt like no time had passed, and yet everyone he had once known was gone. Only their descendants stood before him now, calling him uncle or grandfather. All he could do was look at a familiar face in a new body and say, as Elrond might upon seeing Thorin's kin, "I knew your ancestor. You have much of his bearing." Perhaps these descendants would one day perform deeds that would secure their own place in memory. Perhaps. But for Li Wei, the clearest memories, the ones he had lived most closely with, were still those first companions from long ago. Time wears on those who do not notice it. Some, however, seem oblivious to everything around them. Take the white wizard Saruman, for example. Li Wei sat in the castle, sorting through reports. Ranger intelligence showed that Saruman had been unusually restless over the decades, one season in the Water City, another on the edge of the Misty Mountains, last month in the Gladden Fields, then the ruins of Eregion the next. It looked like constant activity at a glance, but a closer look revealed long gaps between those appearances. About 10 years ago, he finally settled, secluding himself in Orthanc Tower and barely stepping outside. At the same time, the Shire's rangers noticed that Saruman was buying prodigious amounts of supplies, food, pipes, tobacco, so much that some estimated the stockpiles could feed a modest army. He purchased from the Shire, from Roadside Fort, even from Water City, in vast quantities. He clearly had people to support. Isengard was more than a single tower. Servants, guards, and the upkeep of a wide domain required many hands. From the reports, Li Wei deduced that, for now, Saruman seemed to have returned to his old scholarly habits, locked in the tower, poring over research with no outward movements. After filing those notes, Li Wei moved his attention elsewhere. Gondor, Mordor, Umbar, Harad, the usual tinderbox of tensions, appeared relatively stable. Skirmishes and provocations continued, but nothing escalated into full-scale war. Activity in the Far East, as always, remained difficult to detect. Sauron, Li Wei thought, was a different matter. He was a prodigy and tireless worker. Judging by the amount of business flowing through him, he ran things around the clock. He didn't just wage wars and broker alliances, he micromanaged development at home. National organization, breeding of ferocious beasts, cultivation of new species, military buildup, economy, research, diplomacy. Nearly everything ran through him. The Witch King and other ringwraiths were executors of his will. People with a single, uncompromising aim often had the greatest capacity to carry it out, and Sauron's aim, to spread darkness and drag beauty into ruin, was as pure as it was terrible. He moved with ruthless efficiency, treating the world like a game to be won. Facing such an opponent was a constant headache. Leeway felt a disquiet he could not shake. Mor's long silence was ominous. At least the Balrog in Moria seemed to have no plans. Its disappearance relaxed people more than Sauron's silence did. Ranger detachments had searched Moria several times over the years and found no trace of it. It was as if the creature had vanished. Then again, such beings could sleep for centuries unless the stone above them was shattered, so it was plausible the Balrog was simply lying immobile somewhere under the mountain. Leeway poured himself a cup of tea and set the papers aside. Spring had come to the territory, and with it the training grounds were busy. Leeway stood on the drill field, watching squad after squad of warriors march past. Leading the formation were the Rangers in their dark metals, the most striking sight. Over the years, enough people had earned the excellent Ranger commendation to form a company of several hundred. A company like that, well led, could punch through an enemy 10 times its size. Add a few Legion champions, and they could even turn back and rout a larger foe. The standards for excellent Rangers were not uniform. Some were superb tacticians, others excelled in extreme climates. Some were masters of reconnaissance. Legion champions were different. One requirement, and nothing else: be the best fighter among the Rangers of your generation. A Legion champion, when not exhausted, could spar with Leeway himself on even terms, perhaps even edge him. Leeway watched the Blade Legion as the ceremony ended and nodded with grim approval. Facing that unit would be trouble indeed. "All right, dismissed," he said, waving his hand as the parade broke up. Nearby, under the giant Malorn, Little Pink shifted his coils and continued to lie on the grass. As Leeway passed, the dragon pushed his huge head against Leeway's shoulder, a rub strong enough to send Leeway a step off balance. Little Pink had grown enormous, so large that the ladder to the Malorn's crown could no longer support him. Fortunately, those wings were functional. He had learned to fly long ago, though he preferred to sprawl on the ground. Compared to his size, the Malorn looked a bit small, and a dragon curled around it was a conspicuous sight. Someone had been so taken with that image that they embroidered it onto a flag, a dragon coiled on a Malorn. Leeway had liked the design and hung the flag beneath the tree where Little Pink lived. Little Pink had no objection, but the dragon did have other thoughts. This year, he'd come to Leeway and asked if he had grown up. When Leeway answered yes, Little Pink requested that his childish name be changed. His scales were no longer soft pink, but a deep, hard red, neat, glossy, dignified. He wanted a proper dragon's name. Leeway, for once, did not reply. He fell silent, and Little Pink, studying him, realized that waiting on Leeway was pointless. "If you won't give me a name," the dragon told him, "I'll choose one myself." After that, Little Pink stopped loafing on the grass beside the castle. Instead, he began coiling at the entrance of the nameless tower and asking passers-by to fetch books for him. Sometimes he could read the pages himself, other times he had someone read aloud. The dragon took to learning on his own. The child had been forced to grow. In no time, a new rumor spread beneath the nameless tower: the dragon who loved books. Chapter 310, A Gift. Spring had slipped into autumn, and by early September, Leeway was riding west again. Little Pink watched him go with a look of wounded pride as he headed for the Shire. It was that time of year, Bilbo's birthday, and it had been many years since Leeway had last called. He wondered how the old Hobbit was faring. With a few small gifts packed, Leeway rode leisurely past Bree in the Old Forest, cast a glance at the Barrow Downs, and entered Hobbiton without trouble. He dismounted and rapped on the round green door of Bag End. Thump, thump. "I'll get it," came a surprisingly young voice from inside. When the door opened, Leeway found himself looking down at a teenage hobbit. Bilbo have a child? He thought, startled. The boy was just as surprised, and they stared at each other for a long, awkward second. Then the child suddenly squealed. The commotion summoned the old hobbit out of his doorway, frying pan in hand. His eyes widened with delight. "Oh, Leeway, welcome, welcome. It really is you," Frodo, who by now was every bit Bilbo's mirror, said, excitement brightening his face. Yes, of course it's you. Leeway took in the scene and asked Bilbo, "This child is?" "Frodo. You met him 13 years ago." "Oh, I remember now." Leeway bent and patted Frodo's head. "Why is he at Bag End? Where are his parents?" Bilbo waved a hand. "They're chatting with old Mr. Ba, 2 foot next door, and Mr. Hamfast, our gardener, is tending the plants." A voice rustled from the hedges. "I'm not at Mr. 2foot's," said Mr. Hamfast, looking up from where he was trimming a bed. "I'm busy in your garden, Mr. Bilbo." Bilbo nodded, barely concerned with such small details. Greetings, honored Mr. Leeway." Mr. Hamfast straightened, doffed his cap, and offered a bow before returning to his work, stealing the occasional curious glance. Strange visitors were nothing new at Bag End. Wizards, dwarves, and now even a Lord of the North had come through this door. How Bilbo knew them all was a mystery, but the neighbors had grown used to his eccentricities. He was generous, convivial, and well-liked, so folks were always ready for a chat. After sending Frodo off to keep an eye on the soup, Bilbo leaned close to Leeway, smiling conspiratorially. "You know, Frodo and I share the same birthday. This one's got a taste for adventure. I'll have to tell you about Beanfield Farm sometime." "He loves stories," Bilbo continued. "Your stories, my stories." Once he ran all the way from the other side of the Brandywine to Bag End just to listen. His family looked for him all day and found him here, content as could be, just to hear a tale. "He's picked up a little Elvish from me, too," Bilbo added proudly. "Been a full few years, really." Leeway grinned. "Sounds like Bag End has been lively." "You should hear him this year," Bilbo said. "He begged to celebrate here instead of at Brandywine, so we'll have 2 birthday cakes to make merry." Leeway hesitated, then confessed, "I only came with a small gift for you." "Nonsense," Bilbo waved a hand. "Your coming is the gift." He nudged Leeway with a mischievous look, "And I'm sure Frodo thinks the same. He's very happy to see you," Frodo called from the kitchen, thrilled that the figure from his stories had stepped out of those tales into his life. "All right then," Bilbo declared. "Come, help in the kitchen. Let's cook a feast." Leeway ducked inside, took over the chopping and stirring from Frodo, and set to work. By nightfall, the table groaned with food from across the lands, and novel dishes that made even Bilbo's neighbors raise an impressed eyebrow. In the center of the table sat 2 large cakes Leeway had baked, one for Bilbo, one for Frodo. Zuoguo and his wife arrived then, returning from a visit to old Mr. 2foot and a trip to the market. They carried a bounty of fine ingredients and 2 rare bottles of wine, as thanks for Bilbo's kindness to Frodo. They were pleasantly surprised at the spread Leeway had prepared, and even more surprised to find him among the guests. "Heavens, it's you!" Zuoguo cried. "We owe a great deal to you and the rangers of your territory. If it hadn't been for them, I can't imagine how Frodo would have managed." Bilbo shot him a teasing glance. "You'd best reflect on yourselves properly." "We have reflected, cousin," Zuoguo replied, settling into a chair. Leeway only said quietly, "Parting is hard. If people can still be with those they love, they should treasure it." Everyone agreed. The feast ran long and merry. By the time it ended, it was late and pitch black outside. There was no sense in sending anyone home, and Bag End was roomy. No one would sleep on the street. After all, 13 dwarves had once stayed here without complaint. That night, Zuoguo and his wife, having eaten and drunk their fill, were asleep almost as soon as their heads hit the pillows. Frodo, however, was still wide awake, pleading for another story. Bilbo shook his head and pointed at Leeway, who was seated in the courtyard watching the star-strewn sky. "Leeway has the best stories. Why don't you ask him?" Frodo came over with that earnest, stumbling curiosity only children have, and Leeway found himself amused. "All right, come sit here." Leeway patted the empty spot beside him. "What would you like to hear?" Frodo's eyes widened. "Everything." So Leeway talked late into the night. He told of archers and rangers, of mistaken commanders and chancellors, of a mithril dagger and far-off campaigns. Frodo listened until his eyelids fluttered. Bilbo, sitting nearby, let out a yawn as the words stretched into the quiet night. "What happened to that great archer?" Frodo mumbled, nearly asleep. "And the ranger captain who was thought to be a commander? And the chancellor who gave you the dagger? Are they all well?" Leeway hesitated. In this world, humans were free in ways hobbits rarely had to contemplate. When a life ended, Sometimes the soul wandered on to other places, other stories. He smiled gently and patted the child's head. Perhaps they've gone on to new adventures elsewhere. Frodo, content with that, finally drifted off. Bilbo scooped him up and carried him inside. The old hobbit's eyes shone with gratitude. "Forgive me," Leeway said softly, as Frodo slept. "I came in a hurry and didn't bring you anything proper." Frodo stirred but was already half in dreams when Leeway continued. "Then I'll give you a different kind of gift. One I can't wrap. I'll give you a journey." "A journey?" Bilbo asked, smiling. "Yes," Leeway said. "An adventure. I'll choose the places we might go, and you can choose the time." "Good," Frodo murmured in his sleep. Bilbo, carrying him inside, paused at the door and looked at Leeway with a tenderness that reached back over years. "What a precious gift," he said quietly. "More precious than anything else. If someone had said such words to me once, if I could go on another journey, even into Dragonfire, past armies and ogres, I would have set out without a second thought." He sighed, the sound full of a long life lived and remembered. "I never regret any of it, Leeway. Not a single moment." Bilbo turned his head, met Leeway's eyes, and gave him a simple, heartfelt blessing. "Bless you." Chapter 311, Interlude. The Brandybucks have always been a bit peculiar. During a casual conversation, Bilbo was telling Leeway about Frodo's mother's family. "That's true," he added, smiling. Their neighbor, Old Daddy Twofoot from number 2 Bagshot Row, had been within earshot and piped up. "After all, they live on the oddest stretch of the Brandywine, right by the old forest. That wood isn't right. Dark, creepy, full of strange sounds. No telling what's affected them." "Mr. Baggins is a decent, respectable fellow," he went on, "but I never understood why anyone from the Baggins side in Hobbiton would go so far afield to find a wife. Their young Frodo, though, very polite, one of the nicest little hobbits I've met." That's no surprise his father's a Baggins," Old Daddy Twofoot mumbled as he ambled off. "It seems your family has a fine reputation," Leeway teased Bilbo. Bilbo only shrugged. "Hobbits love a settled life," he said, "and the Bagginses are practically synonymous with respectability. That's earned my forebears a lot of regard." "Is that so?" a warm voice interrupted. Gandalf, leaning on his staff and blotting out the sun a little more than politeness would allow, stood before them. "But there is one Baggins I know who has a taste for adventure." "There are exceptions, and you're late, Gandalf." Bilbo sprang up. Though his tone was reproachful, he hugged the wizard without hesitation. "Forgive me, Bilbo. I was held up 2 days by some trifles, otherwise I would have missed your birthday," Gandalf said. He turned to Leeway. "I'm sorry I missed the feast. I hope there were plenty of delicacies." Gandalf beamed. "Long time no see, Leeway." "Long time no see, Gandalf," Leeway replied. The two exchanged the kind of shoulder-patting greeting common among old friends, intimate and easy. Almost at once, Gandalf added, "You've changed a bit." Leeway gave a small smile. Gandalf's eyes softened. "Well, some things one must go through, I suppose. I've always tried to keep that in mind." "Good," Gandalf said lightly, and moved on. "I don't think you're the exception, Bilbo. I told you, your maternal grandfather, Gerontius Took, Old Took, was always full of adventure. When the White Wolf threat came to the Shire and the Brandybucks called for aid, he was among the first to answer. He and the others drove the beasts off and kept the Shire safe." At the name of Old Took, Gandalf's face took on a fond look. "Ah, my old friend. Old Took and I were companions for over 100 years. Whenever he held a Midsummer's Eve party, I would go, bringing my fireworks. Once I gave him a pair of diamond buttons that had a touch of magic in them. He was overjoyed. He said it was one of the happiest days of his life." Gandalf smiled then, neither sorrowful nor heavy, simply recalling a friendship that had lasted a century. "Those buttons now lie with him." "That's remarkable," Leeway said. "Old Took lived to 130 years, did he not? The longest-lived hobbit on record? That's what they say." Gandalf glanced at Bilbo with a mischievous light in his eyes. "But you've forgotten one thing. Old Took also holds the record for the most offspring." Bilbo nodded. "Indeed." Leeway felt the sun warm on his face. Bilbo brought together the Baggins' love of comfort and the Took's daring in equal measure, which made Gandalf's coaxing so effective. The old wizard could be very persuasive when he chose to be. After a while, the three went inside. Bilbo, as genial host, bustled off to boil water for tea and fetch snacks. While Bilbo fussed in the kitchen, Gandalf took the chance to tell Leeway of his recent travels. "I saw the markings you left in Moria and the signs of campfires," Gandalf said. "You went inside?" Leeway asked. "Yes, it was strangely quiet. I walked for a long time and didn't even see a single bat." Gandalf paused, the memory shading his voice. "The dwarves have been thinking of Moria again. Last year, Balin asked me about it. I shared what I observed, and he asked whether it was a good time to try to reclaim their halls." "What did you tell him?" Leeway asked. Gandalf shook his head. "I told him to wait." "Why?" Leeway pressed. "I can't put it into words, but there's a feeling." Gandalf's brow creased slightly. "There is a deep malice still hidden there. The orcs and such may have been cleared in part, but there remains the presence of a Balrog whose whereabouts are uncertain. I searched and found no trace." "Perhaps it has returned to the deep places to lie in wait," Leeway said. "But it has not gone. Years ago, Galadriel and I helped to keep its movements bound within the Great Mountains. As long as Nenya, one of the 3 elven rings, holds its power, it cannot take step beyond those bounds." "I've heard of that," Gandalf said. He appreciated the gravity of what Leeway explained. Nenya's understanding and preserving power sustained the Golden Wood. Without it, that realm would quickly fade, and Galadriel's people would lose their refuge. It was no wonder she did not stray far from home unless necessary. "Balin at least was sensible," Gandalf continued. "He grumbled a bit, as dwarves do, but he chose to heed my advice." Gandalf had respect for Balin's steadiness and thoughtfulness. No surprise, then, that they had reason to get on well. The kettle hissed in the next room, and Bilbo's cheerful clatter drifted through the doorway as their conversation turned to lighter things. Chapter 312, The End of an Era. "They'd best stay put and not take any risks until the Balrog's movements are clear," Leeway instructed. "I'll speak with them about it." Gandalf agreed. "And I'll keep watch on the news. I'll let you know the moment anything changes." "Tea's ready," Bilbo called from inside the house, ending their private conference. "Coming." They rose and went in to join him. The afternoon tea was peaceful enough, but peace seldom lasts long. After tea, they parted, Leeway and Gandalf walking together toward Bree's roadside fort. On the way, they spoke of many things: Leeway's recent slaying of a Balrog, which Gandalf still regarded as recent, Aragorn's return, and new events to the east. "I heard about the 2 blue-robed wizards from Aragorn," Gandalf said. "It seems their work has made some headway." "What did he say?" Leeway asked. He had not had news from the east or the south in many years. Much must have changed there. "What of the Connaught?" Gandalf's face grew grave. "Their new king refuses to bow to Mordor, and his position is precarious. He still sends tributes each year, but he is surrounded by Mordor, the lands of the east, and Harad. There is little he can do." Leeway considered this. The Connaught was hemmed in, too far from the free cities, too close to Mordor. A refusal to submit could mean death. Reluctant tribute might be the only thing keeping them alive. If the Ringwraiths decided to pay them a call, they would not be there to negotiate. They would tear out hearts. "If they want independence," Gandalf continued, "they will need allies. Sauron holds the lands closest to Mordor tight, but farther east there are realms not yet touched by darkness. Possible friends. That's precisely what the blue-robed wizards are trying to secure." They talked as the road carried them into Bree. Thanks to the presence of the roadside fort, the town had grown more prosperous. Standards of life had risen noticeably. Rangers now walked openly, and the criminals who once hid in shadow had vanished. Gandalf went straight to the prancing pony, where the proprietor greeted him warmly. Apparently they were old acquaintances. Gandalf ordered 2 mugs of ale, and carrying them back, handed one to Leeway, who still wore a broad hood. "Thank you," Leeway said, lifting the mug and drinking half of it at a tilt. Gandalf chuckled at the hood. "You've at last learned discretion." Leeway shrugged. "I never thought a face could disturb the order around it." "Fame can be a burden," Gandalf said. Even hooded, Leeway could feel glances, mostly from the rangers, who recognized him but did not intrude. He waved them off, and they returned to their business. They finished their ales, and Gandalf, evidently still peckish, ordered a plate of roasted meat, bread, and some sweet and sour jam. He had a knack for good pairings. Seeing that, Leeway called to a passing waitress, gesturing at Gandalf. "I'll have the same." Very good. And me too, another voice said. A tall, travel-worn figure sat beside Leeway. Good afternoon, Uncle Leeway, Gandalf. Aragorn, Gandalf greeted. Why are you here? Alatar asked me to bring his regards to you and Fallodin, Aragorn said. Leeway nodded. You two get on well. Aragorn had finished his long journey. Over the meal, he told them of his travels. He had left Rivendell in 2952 and had wandered through Middle-earth, leaving deeds and tales across the lands. In 2981, tempered by battles and experience, he returned north to his people, marked by hardships but resolved, and would stay among his kin for a while. When they parted, Gandalf went his own way, Aragorn to the northern front, and Leeway back to Roadside Fort to attend to the routine duties of his territory. The system in place meant he rarely needed to involve himself in every small matter. His days settled into a steady rhythm of reviewing reports, expediting minor affairs, and stepping in on larger projects to speed them along. Time slipped by, almost unnoticed. In 2952, a hobbit was born in Frodo's hometown, Meriadoc Brandybuck, Merry. Frodo's mother visited the child and later told Zuo about it when she returned. Frodo learned he had a cousin more than 10 years younger. A year on, Gondor gave its own good news. Denethor's second son, Faramir, was born. When the boy was a month old, Leeway visited Gondor and held him. The child was healthy. Denethor himself appeared much the same, vigorous, but a new seriousness had settled on him, a weight tied to the passing of Ecthelion. Ecthelion was now 97 and often seemed absent. Leeway would approach, and the old steward took a long moment to return to the present. The universally respected elder finally spoke with a tone of foreboding. Time. At some point it ceased to be just time. It has become something to fear. Perhaps when it began to feel meaningless, Leeway said, drawing a chair opposite him. How have you been? Everything is well enough, Ecthelion replied slowly. You look well yourself. As always, that's good. He sighed. I have a bad feeling, something like a shadow coming. Denethor will have heavy burdens, Leeway said, but he's strong. I've seen him grow over the years. He will go on, Ecthelion agreed. They spoke of Gondor and Mordor, of the future. Then they walked together, from the White City down to the Calenardhon fortifications of the Anduin and back, talking as friends do. Spring turned to autumn and then to winter. In the next spring, Leeway returned to Gondor to visit an old companion and to say a last farewell. In the sacred precincts of Minas Tirith, in the tombs of the stewards, Denethor stood before a marble slab, silent and lost in thought. Footsteps sounded behind him. A flower was placed upon the tomb. Denethor's shoulders sagged, and as he turned, the warmth of a friend's armor steadied him. You know, Leeway said gently, I can still remember that summer, running through Rohan with the four of us, slurping terrible mushroom soup, then eating fresh grilled fish afterward. There's something about past and adventure that always makes good memories. Leeway clasped Denethor's shoulder. Your father thought highly of you. He believed you could carry the future of this land. And what will you do now? Denethor asked, his voice clear beneath the dome and high walls. I will go forward, he answered. In 2984, Ecthelion Sect died at 98, and Denethor succeeded him as steward. An era truly came to an end, and quietly, a new melody began to play. Chapter 313, A Battle of Wills. When Ecthelion II died, Denethor remained silent for a long time before taking up the office of Prime Minister. People soon adjusted to the new steward's manner. Unlike his predecessors, Denethor was taciturn. He could listen with his father's patience, allowing subordinates to finish their sentences, yet afterward would still impose his own will. He took advice, but whether he acted on it was another matter entirely. Perhaps the movements of Aragorn and Gandalf in Gondor had put him on edge. Feeling his authority threatened, Denethor tightened his grip on power and kept key authorities firmly in his own hands. In Minas Tirith, within a heavily guarded high tower, Denethor lifted an opaque black cloth to reveal the Stone of Seeing beneath. Because of the stone's nature, when Ecthelion was alive, no one, not even Denethor, was permitted to enter here. The Palantir lay before him like a clear, starry sky. He stared at it and sank into thought. A strange premonition pressed on him. The age might end in his lifetime, and Gondor would face a final, decisive clash with Mordor. Though the front seemed stable now, that vague foreboding, coupled with what he could deduce from the signs, kept his brow tight. I will not let Gondor fall, he said to himself. Never. Denethor reached out and touched the stone. He knew the risks, that it was connected to Sauron and that using it invited peril, but the memories of Minas Morgul, of poisoned air and brutalities witnessed since childhood, the tragedies and regrets that had shaped him, drove his hand. Thump, like a heavy hammer upon the soul, darkness burst from the stone and blanketed the tower's upper room. A figure formed in the gloom, engulfed in black flames, a massive, glowing eye. Sauron's gaze had fallen onto the place the moment the stone was stirred, and a hard, oppressive dark filled the chamber. Denethor's hair whipped as if in a wind, his outer robe flared though there was no breeze, revealing armor beneath and the iron sword at his hip. The eye burned upon him, and for the first time a film of sweat beaded on his brow. Countless malicious whispers pressed against his mind, trying to wrench control of the stone away. From the instant his fingers touched the palantir, a contest of wills had begun. Cold winds rose and the darkness thickened until not a ray of light remained. Sauron's presence closed in on Denethor, seeking to unman him. Do you think that by putting on such a show you can frighten me? Denethor scoffed from within the shadow, his voice damp with sweat, but his anger hotter than the evil flames. Sauron answered with visions. Gondor in ashes, cities razed, people slaughtered, orcs overrunning the land and enslaving all. It was a strike meant to crush hope and make the steward yield. But the metal of his will would not melt. Amidst whispers and darkness, Denethor planted his feet and let something far deeper and fiercer, the long, relentless hatred and duty that had been his life, surge outwards. It overwhelmed Sauron's assault. The oppressive gloom dissolved, the illusions snapped away. Denethor drew a deep breath, a slight, grim smile touching his lips. I won, he murmured. Now the stone no longer showed the eye or visions of Gondor's doom, but the true arrangements within Mordor and the movements at the front. Sauron, far off in Barad-dûr, could not prevent Denethor from seeing his side's secrets. He could only watch impotently. That was something, but Sauron's style was patience. Human will could be astonishing in a moment, he knew, yet it eroded with time and age. One side's resolve might fray, while the other's strength recovered. There was no permanent failure, only delayed victory. For now, Sauron would endure. Denethor let his consciousness roam the palantir, using its sight to probe everywhere. The stone's almost omniscient vision came at a cost. Sauron was only set back temporarily. He still hammered at Denethor's mind, turning their clash into a war of attrition. Each second spent peering into the stone was a test. The least relaxation could be lethal. Fortunately, the steward's will held. As he watched, the image shifted with his thoughts. The palantir showed Mordor, then scrolled outward across Ithilien, Gondor, Rohan, Isengard, the Black Land, even as far as the Lonely Lands and a bustling water city. Near the roadside fort north of the water city, a gray, cloaked figure moved. Aragorn. He crouched in the Etten Moors with rangers, hiding in the brush, appears to be setting an ambush. In the stone he suddenly looked up, eyes sweeping left and right with taut vigilance, making the others tense, yet he saw nothing. Denethor switched the view. A gray-cloaked wizard appeared, Gandalf the Grey, wandering the Shire. The wizard had been visiting the Shire with increasing frequency. In the palantir, he rode at leisure, oblivious to Denethor's scrutiny. A flash of disdain crossed the steward's face. It was those two, an upstart of royal blood and a meddlesome wizard, appearing at inconvenient moments. If you think that merely by showing your lineage and waving a hand you will make everyone bow, you are sorely mistaken, Denethor thought, a hard edge in his mind. Curiosity flickered, and after a pause, Denethor shifted the image again. The stone's view swept to a castle. The man within suddenly raised his head. His eyes seemed to pierce the distance and meet Denethor's gaze directly. The steward felt his heart tighten. Whoosh! The figure in the palantir moved as if casually dismissing something. Leeway waved a hand, and the image in the stone blurred. Chapter 314, Searching for the Cold Dragon. What was that? Inside Roadside Fort, Leeway waved a hand as if brushing something away. A moment before, he had felt a distant gaze fall on him. For a mystic, inspiration, those sudden sparks of perception, was indispensable. After years of practice, Leeway's instincts were finely tuned. Maybe because so much forbidden mysticism had warped his sight, he had grown especially sensitive to being watched. The sensation had been real. A gaze had swept across a distance and landed on him. It carried no obvious malice, but that didn't make it welcome. Who wanted to be stared at constantly? Once the discomfort passed, he went back to his work. Regarding the exploration of the northern mountains, he said, turning to the report the Carltown envoys had left. The northern mountains, known as the Grey Mountains, held the ruined dwarven hall of Dainois. The Scouts' Cup findings were troubling. The dilapidated hall bore signs of orc activity everywhere, but the scouts had also found large claw marks on the floors and pillars, marks no orc, warg, or ogre could have made. There was only one plausible culprit: a dragon. According to the records, the dragons in the Grey Mountains originally came from the frozen North Wasteland, a snowfield still haunted by the residue of Morgoth's power. Drawn by dwarven treasure, they had once poured out from that waste to raid the Grey Mountains. The Hall of Daina had been lost, driving dwarves to relocate to the Lonely Mountain. The dwarves later developed anti-dragon weapons well enough to hold their own against a few ordinary cold dragons that didn't breathe fire. Unfortunately, Smaug, who attacked Erebor, was a fire breather. A dragon entrenched in the Hall of Dainwine was bad news for Carltown and for Vramsburg, which sat right against the Grey Mountains. Li Wei moved quickly. He rode to Carltown and then to Vramsburg, studied the reports, and made plans. The Vramsburg Rangers were already active. Several scout teams led by experienced rangers had pushed into the mountains and into the ruined hall. The engineering team had traveled to the Lonely Mountain and returned with a row of semi-automatic, armor-piercing heavy crossbows mounted along Vramsburg's north wall facing the peaks. When Li Wei saw the neat ranks of heavy crossbows, he almost felt the cold dragon could be dealt with even without him. Then the Rangers returned with more intelligence gathered from inside the hall. There are many dragon skeletons, one reported. The markings on the bones look like they were caused by dragons themselves. They fought among each other over something. How do you know that? Li Wei asked. The ranger stepped forward. I borrowed some books from the dwarves' archives. One record describes it. He recited in a flat, historical tone. The dragons occupied the Grey Mountains, but as mining dwarves left, treasures grew scarce for a perpetually breeding population. Hungry and cramped, the dragons turned on one another, killing to claim the remaining wealth. The fighting devastated the region and reduced their numbers. Finally, unsatisfied even with the Grey Mountains' riches, Smaug flew south in Third Age 2770 and brought ruin upon Erebor. I understand, Li Wei said. So there was a civil war among the dragons over wealth. We just don't know how many remain. Have you found their exact lair? He asked. The rangers exchanged looks and shook their heads. They had not pinpointed any active dragon, but they had mapped the interior of the hall as best they could. The dwarves no longer kept precise records of this colony. Any original plans had been lost. One ranger handed Li Wei the hastily drawn map, marked with areas of recent orc activity. We didn't attack head-on, he added. If a dragon smells blood, it could become more alert. Li Wei studied the map. It doesn't matter where it hides. Once I clear the hall, it won't matter how deep it burrows. Enter alert status and wait for my orders, he instructed, then left the town wall and set off alone into the Grey Mountains with the map in hand. That day he followed the ancestral dirt road, now little more than a track, to the foot of a great mountain and found the entrance to the ruined hall. New area unlocked. Mist dissipated. The Hall of Dainwine. Using the sunlight that slanted through the main entrance, Li Wei peered into the wreckage. The rangers had not exaggerated. Almost nothing here stood intact. Pillars were sheared off or missing great chunks, as if struck by overwhelming force. Floors had collapsed in great swaths, leaving sand and shattered rock littered across ruined terraces. Pits and holes yawned everywhere. The ground was treacherous. The rangers had marked a few passable roads, but they were circuitous. Li Wei, impatient with long detours, took out several flat cobblestones and set them underfoot, stepping from one to the next as he advanced. Clatter. He knocked on a relatively intact door in the main hall, one that looked recently used. The knock rang sharply. A muffled voice answered from inside. Who the damned? The door cracked open. An orc peered out, grumbling, and what met his gaze was a greatsword. its blade dark and streaked red. A single, brutal strike cleaved the intruder in two. The sound echoed through the hall, and the orcs inside went rigid, staring. The one who had opened the door collapsed, armor and body severed, instantly silent. "Tell me," Li Wei demanded, his voice cold, "where is that dragon?" Chapter 315, Dragon Bones Everywhere. "Sir, I don't know. We never dared to go into the inner parts of the mountain. For hundreds of years, we've only lived on the outskirts." An orc, captured by Li Wei, spoke with difficulty. "Is that so?" It made sense. Cowardly brutes like these, who preyed on the weak and feared the strong, would never provoke a dragon. If a dragon took a dislike to them, all of them could be wiped out in an instant. "If you know nothing, then close your eyes forever, just like your companions." A casual sentence, but it made the orc tremble. Wait, speak." The greatsword at his throat squeezed the words out of him. "I know something else. I know there's a group deeper in who serve the dragon. They help it find food. I can lead you to them, and you can try to trick them into luring the dragon out. You could set an ambush." Crack. The orc's vision spun and his voice was gone. "No need," Li Wei said it flatly. If this had been earlier in his career, he might have considered the plan. Now, no. The scheme was too convoluted, too risky. Find the dragon's followers, threaten them, bribe them, guard against betrayal. All pointless when he could simply crush them directly. He took the map back out and began sweeping the orc strongholds marked on it. At each place he passed, he drew an extra circle on the mark, cleared. When most of the strongholds had been emptied, some of the more alert orcs noticed something was wrong. The orcs nearer the mountain's heart grabbed their weapons and rushed out, only to meet a dark figure dragging a greatsword. It was hard to tell whether the dark red on him was a pattern or dried blood. "You, don't come closer. Know who we serve. The dragon, the mighty dragon," they shouted. Seeing the newcomer's face, the orcs shivered, but counting on the dragon's backing, some still took swings. Crack. The ones who actually dared to strike were cut down, bodies and weapons splintered alike. "Lead me to your master before my patience runs out." Clang. The rest surrendered. The dragon was too far away. Li Wei was too close. Under the example of their slain comrades, they had no choice but to lead him. As they went inward, a certain aura grew stronger and stronger. At one point, Li Wei stopped so abruptly that the orcs in front shivered. Beneath a broken pillar, a complete dragon skeleton lay half-buried. Exactly what I needed. Li Wei went straight to work, taking the bones apart and packing them away. He piled up ribs and vertebrae until he had a substantial haul. While he worked, one of the orcs gathered courage and blurted out, "Sir, you need dragon bones?" Li Wei glanced up and motioned for him to continue. The orc swallowed and said, "There are many other places with dragon remains. If you spare me, I can lead you to them." "Oh," Li Wei feigned interest. "And you pledge loyalty if I spare you?" "And to us," the rest chimed in quickly. Serving the dragon had been their lot. Serving a famed dragon slayer would be the same. One of the two sides would survive this day. They intended to align themselves with the strong. It was the orc way. Follow strength unless bound by some magical compulsion like Sauron's brand or the One Ring. Acceptable. Li Wei's answer was short. The Misty Mountain orcs were relatively free. Their word had some weight, if only a little. Relieved, they didn't press for more. After years of surviving brutal dragons, they knew better than to bargain with someone who could utterly crush them. Stories of companions devoured alive were vivid lessons. Efficient and eager, the orcs led him from one cache of dragon remains to another. Li Wei's backpack filled quickly. Fortunately, the ender chest wasn't full, so it could hold the rest. By the time the last of the orcs' known piles had been collected, the chest was near capacity. Li Wei couldn't help but think that if dragons had been more orderly, if they'd multiplied without falling to civil war, other races would have had no place on this world. They'd be nothing but miners and cattle. After the final haul, the orcs led him deeper until they stopped at the entrance to a sealed chamber. The orc leader whispered, "Sir, the dragon is inside. What will you do?" "Leave," Li Wei said, "and remember your promise." Yes, we'll go. We swear it." They hurried away. Li Wei pried open the chamber door himself. Inside, it was pitch black and silent. He lit a torch and descended the steps. At the bottom, he raised the light and saw gold, silver, and gem-studded things glittering in the torchlight. Coins and jewels sent tiny cascades as if something had shifted beneath them. "Didn't I tell you? Don't come in and disturb me unless necessary." A thunderous roar rolled through the hall. From under the treasure, a dragon broke free and pushed its head out, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air with growing unease. It peered at the intruder with bright, wary eyes. "Who are you?" "The one who will kill you," Li Wei said. "Ha! Ridiculous little human, to speak such arrogant words." He didn't wait to hear more. He jammed the torch into a crevice in the wall and, sword already raised, lunged. His blade crashed into the dragon's head, shattering scales and sending fragments flying. The force of the blow made the dragon recoil. It hauled its bulk free from the horde and reared up, whole shoulders rippling with armored plates. Li Wei took in its full form and couldn't help laughing. This counts as a dragon. Chapter 316, neatly arranged. No wonder Li Wei was laughing. The so-called dragon before him was on all fours, its long neck lined with irregular, sharp teeth and spikes running down its back. It looked ferocious, except it had no wings. A wingless, flightless dragon. Li Wei preferred to call it a giant lizard. It even had only 600 health points, clearly no match for Smaug. Its scales didn't look very tough, nowhere near as hard as Smaug's, not even as hard as Little Pink's. The ordinary sword strike from before had already taken off more than 10 points. And its size, Smaug had been about 140 meters long. This thing was maybe 50 at most. A child, really, only capable of bullying orcs. "Damn human," it roared. The wingless dragon charged in fury, and then, too late, realized its mistake. It didn't even try to dodge. Li Wei swung his dragon flame steel greatsword. With a thunderous crack, he cleaved down through the already weakened scales and into the flesh. The dragon howled, and a terrible blaze erupted along its body, lighting the treasure-stuffed hall. Li Wei didn't stand idle. After downing a strength potion, he hammered at it with continuous swings, repelling and driving the beast back until it was half dead. As the scales on its neck shattered and Li Wei's blade found a crack that would sever the head, the creature let out a frantic life-or-death bellow. "Mama!" Boom! A wall exploded outward. Treasures flew like debris as something enormous burst through from the next chamber. A dragon nearly 100 meters long poured in, but it was too late. The thing saw the severed head of its offspring. "Despicable food, scum you dare!" It charged in a blinding rage. Li Wei stood on the corpse, looked up, and took measure of the new attacker, nearly 100 meters long. He planted his feet, raised his sword, and met it head-on. The impact rocked the hall. Runes flared across Li Wei's body, buffering the blow. To onlookers, he seemed to hold the upper hand, but without that rune shield, he would have been forced back several steps. "So you're the human who killed Smaug," the dragon rumbled, calming a little. "I must admit, you're formidable. Even if our whole line had gone at him, we would have been beaten." "So you're surrendering?" Li Wei mocked. "If you give up now, I might consider letting you return to the North Waste to eke out an existence." "Ha ha ha, tiny thing, such arrogance," the dragon sneered. "Don't think we'll be cowed just because you killed Smaug." Its enormous eyes flickered gold as it spoke, glancing twice as if expecting something. Li Wei watched, letting it stall. Finally, he asked with interest, "Since you know I killed Smaug, do you still intend to face me here?" "Don't think I don't know." The dragon began, stretching its neck forward and peering mockingly. "I've heard Smaug was wounded by a human long ago and later gravely harmed by that human's descendant using the same method. If not for that, how could you have killed him?" Li Wei let out a short laugh. Yes, he had used that arrow to quickly fell Smaug, but it wasn't the only way. He had aimed for a weak point because Smaug was alive, he thought, and could flee. This wasn't a mindless game beast that would mindlessly pursue aggro to death. A living, cunning monster that sensed danger would run, and once it ran, it was nearly impossible to catch. If the two had been confined in a room with no escape, Smaug would have been slowly worn down over a long time. The arrow merely shortened that process. The dragon's sneer widened. "You're alone now. What can you do, no matter how strong? Killing a juvenile dragon isn't something to boast about. Where's your archer companion? Probably dead, right? Humans are short-lived and fragile, both he and you. After we kill you, We'll dig up that archer's grave and hang your corpses on the wall so everyone knows the great dragons are the victors." The ugly, wingless dragon roared. The smile slid off Liwei's face. Boom! Another wall collapsed. A dragon over 100 meters long, clearly the reinforcement the mother had been waiting for, rushed in. Now, counting the dead juvenile at Liwei's feet, the family of 3 was complete. In the next instant, Liwei dropped from the dome, and with a single brutal strike, smashed the boastful mother's head into the floor. Scales cascaded into dust as the greatsword drove on, the ground groaning under the impact. The beast thrashed, knocking down stone pillars. Gold plates and silver cups were crushed and twisted, but none of it mattered. With a distinct final crunch, the skull collapsed. Liwei planted both hands on the hilt and drove the blade through the corpse's head. The price for its insolence was paid. The third dragon, newly arrived, hadn't had time to do much. It stared in shock at what had happened, then turned and pushed its legs with all its might. It only regretted that it had no wings and couldn't run faster. When Liwei glanced toward it and took a few steps, the fleeing dragon's heart screamed, "Run faster!" Whoosh! Flames streaked as a figure cut through the air and landed right in front of it. Liwei immediately charged, activated armor break, and hammered the greatsword down onto the beast's skull. Its head snapped back, and the dragon cartwheeled to the side. The move, "Greatsword stops dragon carriage," sealed its fate. A few days later, there were 3 dragon heads mounted on the north wall of Ramsburg, 2 great ones and a small one. Of the 2 big heads, one showed terrible crushing damage, as if a mountain had compressed it in life. The other's face was contorted. Anyone looking up could read raw, human-like fear and regret written across it. If you pried its eyelids open, you could faintly see, reflected in the pupils, a terrifying figure with orange-yellow flames licking across its body. Chapter 317, Champion's Saber. The expedition to Danai's Hall proved unusually rewarding. The old dragon quarrels left many skeletons scattered through the hall and the wildlands around it, greatly replenishing their supply of dragon bone. There was enough dragon bone that, if converted into dragon bone arrows and rationed carefully, it could sustain a mid-sized battle. Besides bones, they recovered other dragon materials, hearts, scales, blood, but these 3 dragons turned out to be wingless, cold, non-elemental land-dwelling dragons. They could not fly or breathe fire and belonged to a primitive branch of the species, more like the first dragons of this world. Unsurprisingly, there were no eggs. The most valuable parts of these ground dragons were their scales. They were large enough to make armor superior to diamond armor. Their blood and flesh were mixed in usefulness. The blood could be smelted into a steel variant, dragon steel, but without the elemental properties of fire dragon blood, it was inferior to the rare dragon flame steel. Dragon steel didn't reach that limited edition quality, but it still outperformed ordinary diamond-forged metal, making it suitable for armaments given to elite warriors. For Liwei personally, it was not a must-have, but it was still worth distributing. He had to consider allocation carefully. There would never be more dragon materials than they had now, while the number of exceptional rangers and powerful fighters kept growing. If they squandered the stock, there would be no way to replenish it except by venturing to the North Wasteland in hope of living dragons, or scouring the northern seas for ancient fossils, both uncertain options. After a brief deliberation, Liwei decided on a plan. Dragon steel swords would be given to every Legion champion. Because the metal was forged from non-elemental dragon blood, the swords lacked the mystique and extreme performance of dragon flame steel weapons, but they were excellent all the same, heavier and larger than normal swords, with a base damage of 16 points. Only massive battle axes or monstrous mallets matched that damage, and those were far less convenient. The Dragonbone swords, by contrast, dealt 8 points of damage, 1 point more than the improved standard steel swords commonly used by roadside forts soldiers and rangers, but boasted 3 times the durability. Unfortunately, even with the enlarged bone cache, only a few hundred Dragonbone swords could be produced. Liwei had originally intended to give those bone swords to all the top rangers, but realized the supply would be exhausted within a few years at the current rate of new talent. That would create inequality. Some would be armed, many wouldn't. Rather than let scarcity breed resentment, he opted to fully enchant and optimize the personal weapons of the excellent rangers instead. Dragonbone could not be hoarded unused, though, so he had another batch of Dragonbone arrows crafted and stocked them in the armory as a strategic reserve, to be issued in emergencies at the discretion of Legion commanders, or, when a commander was absent, their company captains. Let's do it this way for now, he decided. He called Little Pink to the forge and set the new project in motion. Dragonsteel was not on the old synthesis tables, but Little Pink learned the process quickly. The smelting time was surprisingly short, and she could produce several pieces a day. Within a few days, they had enough Dragonsteel swords to arm the champions. 5 active combat-ready Legion champions, plus 1 retired champion who no longer went to the field, received Dragonsteel swords. The champions took to them like moths to flame, reluctant to let the heavy blades out of their sight. After all, champions were the mightiest fighters in each 5-year competition. They had the stamina to wield such weapons. All of them wanted to feel the weight and bite of the new swords, except for the first champion. A pair of withered hands accepted the Dragonsteel sword from Liwei's own hands. For the first time in many years, the original Legion champion, Ergi, donned his champion's cloak and laurel wreath and stood for the small awarding ceremony with a dignity that suited the title. He swung the sword twice. The blade sang, the air itself seemed to part, and an orc standing before him would likely have been split in two. But when he finished, he was visibly breathless. He sheathed the sword into a custom scabbard the blacksmith had made, light, well-balanced, a snug fit that added no extra burden. "Don't say such inauspicious things," Liwei said, patting Ergi's shoulder. "You're doing fine." Ergi smiled, but he was an old man. He'd once been the first champion and had been hard to dislodge in his prime. A small age advantage had helped him years ago, but time had already taken its toll. His hair was white, his movements still sure but measured. He looked at Liwei with the clear, steady eyes that had always held a respect bordering on devotion. "My lord," Ergi said quietly, "this is a sharp weapon. When I die, please give it to someone who needs it more." It was an unusual request from a man who had always shown unshakable loyalty. Liwei nodded, "As you wish." Only then did Ergi show a pleased, relieved smile. It was practical. The finest gear shouldn't gather dust, but fitting. The other champions voiced similar opinions. Perhaps the Dragonsteel swords would become heirlooms, their histories recorded by future bearers. From that day forward, each Legion champion carried 2 swords on his back, the oversized Dragonsteel blade and a normal personal sword. They normally fought with their familiar swords. The Dragonsteel was reserved for the truly fearsome opponents. When drawn, it meant the champion intended to give everything in the fight, regardless of cost. The champions, now better armed, were positioned along the front lines as the Legion's latent trump cards, ready at any time. With those arrangements finished, Liwei left Roadside Fort and soon appeared in River Valley City. Chapter 318, Changes. A bottle of dragon blood was poured. Whoosh! The dragon bone, soaked in fire dragon blood, burst into flames. The dragon bone sword transformed into a new weapon, the dragon flame bone blood sword. The blade glowed orange-red, wreathed in visible fire. Its searing heat ranked just below that of dragon flame steel, and some mysterious property of the fire dragon blood had made the blade feel heavier. Every enemy struck by it would feel the impact as a crushing blow and be thrown back. Using fire dragon blood to temper a dragon bone sword was a lavish waste. Dragon blood was extraordinarily scarce. Whether from loss of blood or some other cause, Smaug, the huge dragon, had only yielded enough blood for Liwei's own needs. Although dragon scales, meat, and bones were plentiful, blood was rare. Only a little of it, and only the portion that held certain magic, could be used to forge dragon flame steel. Even ordinary, non-imbued dragon blood for making regular dragon steel had barely been collected. The dragon flame bone blood sword was not cost-effective. Though it looked spectacular and was hailed as a legendary weapon, its base damage was only 9.5 points. Its main perks were fire damage and a powerful knockback. Liwei's reason for making the blade was not strictly practical. "I'm afraid I can't wield this sword well, Uncle." Bane tried the dragon flame steel sword a few times with effort and admitted it. A greatsword nearly as tall as an adult was not easy for everyone to handle. "Then take this, Bane." Li Wei took back his Dragonflame steel sword, drew the new Dragonflame bone blood sword, and handed it over. Bane's eyes widened at the sight of the miraculous weapon, Dragonbone tempered with fire dragon blood. As soon as he had it in his hands, he could not resist showing off a few fiery flourishes. Seeing the young man standing there strong and eager, Li Wei nodded, a touch of regret crossing his face. "I should have made this sooner. Bard might have liked it." Bane's heart stirred. He was about to offer comfort when he saw the complex emotions in Li Wei's eyes. Nostalgia, sorrow, loneliness. It was different now, less mythic, more human. Li Wei seemed more real, and the barrier between legend and the present had thinned. Bane could see himself reflected in Li Wei's gaze. He looked at the man before him with new clarity. "Yes, Father would have liked it," he said softly. Bane smiled, though he was a little troubled. "This weapon doesn't look easy to store. It's always burning." "I anticipated that." Li Wei produced a scabbard. It's made from dragon steel, forged by the best smiths from Roadside Fort with the aid of elves and dwarves. It suppresses the sword's flames when sheathed, and when drawn they flare up again. Bane slid the Dragonflame bone blood sword into the scabbard. As Li Wei had promised, the flames were contained. The scabbard was warm, but not enough to burn. It was perfect. "Your father entrusted you with his most precious things," Li Wei said, "and I give you this sword as a testament to all of that." Bane bowed silently and solemnly. Li Wei patted his shoulder with a kind smile and said nothing more. The Dragonflame bone blood sword, with its modest base damage, unusual effects, and full enchantments, was a fine weapon in both symbolism and use. The dragon steel greatsword, numerically stronger, would depend on personal skill. After distributing the weapons, Li Wei returned along the Sky Road to Carl Town to deal personally with the aftermath at Daine's Hall. It had been a busy year. With Li Wei's approval, the Lord of the North, the towns along the Anduin Valley had expanded northward. Many abandoned villages and hamlets were rebuilt all the way to the ruins of Dale, transforming them into a fortified city. But when men pushed further into the former dwarf colonies, they found severe destruction. Most internal structures were ruined, and several wingless cold dragons and large bands of orcs were still present. The Lord set out alone and returned with the carcasses of 3 great dragons. After ensuring Daine's Hall and the Grey Mountains were clear of other dragons, a construction team under the Rangers' protection went from Dale to the Hall to begin repairs. They fixed collapsed supports and floors and lit lamps to make the route safer for those who would follow. When the rebuilding began, the dwarves arrived, having heard the news. Thorin stood before the ruined hall, barely recognizable as his ancestors' stronghold, and memories unique to his people flooded him. "This is where my ancestors once lived. I have never been here," he sighed. "There are no evil dragons left in the Grey Mountains. That is truly a good thing," Li Wei said. "And another good thing," he added, pointing to the ground. "When I killed those 3 dragons, I found a large hoard of treasure they had hidden, probably mined by your ancestors." Thorin paused, fingers resting on the broken gate as he thought for a long time. Then he smiled with a kind of relieved resignation and shook his head. "Those treasures no longer belong to us. My ancestors once fought with the Eotheod over treasure, and my grandfather clashed with the elves over greed, but I am not them." Li Wei returned the smile. This time, the dwarves did not demand the hoard. The king under the mountain showed generosity and relief, qualities rare and all the more remarkable for a dwarf. Men and dwarves reached an agreement, and Daine's Hall was rebuilt as a place where both peoples worked together. With Carl Town and the Grey Mountains settled, those matters were put to rest. Elsewhere, unnoticed by most, Denethor II, the new steward of Gondor, took up the Stone of Seeing and entered a war of wills with Sauron, the great enemy of the Free Peoples. He emerged victorious, but when he came down from the high tower where the stone was kept, people noticed he had visibly aged. After a single night, he looked as if 7 or 8 years had passed over him. He had won the contest and kept pressing Sauron, gathering intelligence, but the strain left him increasingly silent. His words dwindled. He became consumed by the struggle with Sauron, subjecting his mind to relentless pressure and his body to steady wear. He believed that as long as he could hold the advantage and limit losses, he could endure until death. Fate, however, liked its cruelties. Denethor did not die, but his wife did. In the year 2988, Finduilas often woke in the night, sometimes staring toward the cloud-covered sky over Mordor in the east, sometimes gazing at the river. Perhaps because she carried some trace of elven blood, she longed for the sea and for home. The sight of the river and the sky filled her with an unbearable sadness. Her sensitivity to darkness and to evil, the residue of that elven blood, made Mordor, the vast land of darkness opposite the White City, an ever-present weight on her heart. This kind of spiritual wound was the most helpless of all, seemingly irreversible, unstoppable, incurable. Under the combined weight of fear and sorrow, Finduilas died at 38. Denethor stood before her tomb, motionless all through the night, and at dawn he sighed deeply and walked away. After that day he seemed to age again, and he grew still more withdrawn and severe. Chapter 319 talks about Moria. Do not go. It's not safe there. Erebor, year 2989. When Balin excitedly proposed leading an expedition to retake Moria, Gandalf, passing by at the time, warned him off. Remember the tragedy 1,000 years ago, Balin? Gandalf tamped his pipe and said, You can't expect the Balrog to sleep forever. Think of Durin the Sixth, and then Ninwas. Ninwas, son of Durin the Sixth, also believed the Balrog was gone and would not suddenly reappear. He was killed as soon as he was crowned king of Durin. But I've heard that Li Wei and other exploration parties went in and found nothing, Balin protested, reluctant to give up the idea. Gandalf blew a perfect smoke ring and watched it fade. Perhaps it is possible to pass through safely for a time, he allowed, but as a place to live, Moria is not safe. Very unsafe, he repeated, emphasizing the point until Balin's shoulders sagged and a deep sigh escaped him. All right, then, I'll take your advice, Gandalf. Balin's disappointment was clear. If we must give up Moria while the Balrog still lives, when will we ever go back? That Durin's nemesis will make any long-term settlement a foolish gamble, Gandalf finished. Even if it hides and does not show itself, once it is known to be there, no enemy will risk staying. He understood the dwarves' frustration. Li Wei and I have both searched, but we just can't find him. Balin fell silent beside the stone table. The smoke ring had long gone. The firelight painted both their faces. I still want to try. No, Gandalf cut him off firmly. Balin, stay in Erebor. Perhaps you can live to see the end of this age. You may call me cowardly or overly cautious, Balin said, lowering his head, but I do not wish to lose a friend. Dwarves could live for centuries. Balin was 231 and still robust. He could swing an axe and lop off an orc's head with ease. Thorin was only a little younger. Gandalf added, almost as an afterthought, Li Wei also said he doesn't recommend acting on Moria right now. That last remark snuffed out the last of Balin's hope. Then, unexpectedly, Li Wei spoke up. However, it's not entirely impossible. Balin's eyes lit again. Gandalf frowned. He had already persuaded Balin not to go. Why the backtrack? But Li Wei's next words calmed him. You can come to Water City and enter through the West Gate, Li Wei said evenly. We have the West Gate of Moria and the surrounding Eregion under observation. From the surface, nothing slips past us. If anything happens, he added, you can call for help. Balin's face brightened with a renewed, cautious hope. But, Li Wei interrupted, that safety only applies to what can be seen above ground. Traveling through is, to be frank, only relatively safe. It is one thing to pass through under our watch. It is another to re-establish long-term strongholds. If you try to colonize Moria, set up halls and sleep there, then if something strikes in the night, hidden from our sight, I might not know in time. If an attack falls on you while you're asleep and you can't even escape, it would be a disaster. Li Wei's confidence was plain. Water City itself could stand against a Balrog if it came, even without him, but a small dwarven colony could not. He wasn't warning about orcs or ogres. He meant something far older and far deadlier. Balin deflated, but he understood. I'll tell Oin and Ori. They'll be eager to hear this. I'll have my work cut out to keep them from acting on it. Good, Li Wei said, nodding. Balin sighed and left, less eager now, but not without hope. Gandalf, Li Wei said once Balin was gone, changing the subject. Rangers near the Shire and Eregion both report seeing a figure in a gray robe. Have you been there recently? Gandalf frowned. Me? I have indeed been to the Shire more often of late, mainly because I'm worried about Bilbo. He seems to have an unusual vitality for a hobbit his age. If you look closely, he shows almost no white in his hair. I once knew a hobbit named Old Thorin who lived to 130, Gandalf went on, but that was an anomaly. Most hobbits die peacefully at 80 or 90. Bilbo's ring is the real issue. So long as it stays with him, he may outlive more of his kind. That's not what I'm asking, Leeway said. Assume they saw you in the Shire. What about a region? Gandalf's brow furrowed. I passed through a region years ago, on the way into Moria, but I only passed through. I didn't linger. Leeway considered. My people insist they saw a gray-robed old man, mysterious, appearing at night or in secluded spots, both in the Shire and in a region. Mysterious. Gandalf's voice tightened on the word. I go where I please in the daylight. I'm not some shadow walking the hedgerows. That person is not you, he added. I travel main roads when it's reasonably bright. Leeway only shook his head, puzzled. It's strange. Chapter 320, Sneaky Guy. I still don't see what's so special about that short, weak race. Inside Orthanc, Saruman threw back his gray hood, signaling the end of another reconnaissance. Why does Gandalf always go to the Shire? He sank into his chair, thinking. The White Wizard usually wore an air of contempt toward Gandalf, as though he considered him beneath notice. But Saruman knew better than to call it pure disdain. More often, it was envy and caution. He watched Gandalf's words and actions closely, trying to read between them. There's a gray wizard who often visits the Shire, the scouts in Bree had reported more than once. That alone had stirred him. Distrusting his subordinates' judgment, Saruman had even left Orthanc several times to see the Shire for himself. He'd found nothing remarkable, nothing worth concern, save for the pipeweed, which remained excellent. He lit his pipe, satisfied, and soon smoke curled about him. When he was done, he waved the smoke away and returned to his work. Orcs, he muttered. Short, ugly, weak, lazy, ill-tempered, disloyal. Most of the victories orcs had won were due to sheer numbers. On average, they were poor soldiers. A careful youth could fell 2 of them. Yet they had their uses. War was their nature. They had an instinct for it. Their instability made them easy to alter, even at the genetic level. Saruman narrowed his eyes and lit his pipe again. Many of the orcs active in the Black Land, the ruined region, and the Aeneid region had been driven to seek refuge with Leeway, trading loyalty for protection. Still, they were too weak as a race to accomplish anything decisive. Uruk, he said, remembering Sauron's work. Sauron had cultivated a stronger breed, Uruk, using orcs as a base. They weren't individually superior to men, slightly shorter, a bit weaker, but they matured fast. Human children were still gangly when Uruk were already deadly on the battlefield. That potential mattered. If Sauron can breed them, so can I. Saruman looked up, eyes cold with ambition. I will breed a stronger line, larger, stronger Uruk, and show Sauron who is truly the stronger. He snorted. When Mordor is conquered, everyone will look to me, Gandalf included. I will prove I am greater than them all. I need power. Power. In 2990, at Saruman's command, Isengard set up a secret underground breeding pit, stocked not only with captured orcs, but with goblins taken from the Misty Mountains. Saruman, staff black and sharp, paced the dim chambers and put the creatures through his experiments. None could resist him. He had mind-binding spells, and in raw strength he could subdue a handful of orcs without trouble. As for their feelings, what feelings could a race that would eat its own raw when starving have? It mattered little to them whether they were being experimented on. When trials failed, sometimes the animals were turned into meat. Some did try to flee the place from fear of becoming subjects. Saruman sneered at them and ordered them hunted down. You like to escape? I will grant your wish, he said, and they were returned. His robes bore the grime and smeared blood of the pit. Yet after time spent in study, he realized that mere breeding and crossbreeding would not produce the kind of force he wanted. So he raised his staff and intervened with magic, accelerating change at a deeper level. In the half-light of the breeding chambers, the new stock continued to be forged. Still, as he left and climbed back to the tower, a frown creased his brow. Magical catalysis could speed their growth, but the orc nature was fundamentally chaotic. Even if he created a stronger breed, that species would not be loyal to him simply because he had made them. If his power was lacking, they might trample him instead. It always boiled down to power. He could not neglect that. His desk was buried in old pages, secret papers from the Noldor of ruined Eregion. They contained much valuable research material, especially on the forging of rings of power. No one knew how he had acquired them. Meanwhile, on the roadside fort, Gandalf and Li Wei met after a year and chatted about various things. "When I went to the Shire this time, I visited descendants of Old Took," Gandalf said. "Good news. The Took family had a baby this year. He's a great-great-grandson of Old Took. What was his name?" "Peregrine Took. Pippin," Li Wei supplied. "That's easier to say. His parents call him that too." "That's a fine name," Gandalf agreed. Li Wei smiled and asked, with a hint of curiosity, "How do you feel about the newborn?" Gandalf pursed his lips. "I don't like to speak ill of a baby, but his hands are not very gentle. When I got close, he grabbed my beard hard. I don't know how such a tiny thing could have so much strength." "He'll be a mischievous fellow," Li Wei said. Gandalf shook his head, amused. Li Wei couldn't help a small grin. "Yes, mischievous. Quite." "Forgive him, Gandalf. Don't be angry with a child who knows nothing yet." "Of course I'm not angry." Gandalf raised his teacup and sipped, then added, "I've always thought being mischievous was a good sign. Bilbo used to hit my backside with a wooden sword when he was small, and I never minded." "Exactly," Li Wei said, nodding. "Despite that, you remember him all these years." "From that time, I felt Bilbo was special. He left a deep impression on me. That's why when the Erebor expedition came up, I thought of him at once. It seems my judgment was right." Li Wei agreed. Their conversation didn't last long. Gandalf left soon after. When he was gone, Li Wei stretched and picked up a fresh report to scan. What he read sharpened his interest. Rangers had found a band of orcs south of the Black Land and north of Eregion, essentially at the edge of Water City's sphere of influence. But the note that followed made him sit up. Dealt with by a group of Blacklanders? If his memory served him, the Blacklanders were currently allied with Saruman. Recent rumors even said their leader had sworn allegiance to the White Wizard. For them to take the trouble to clear out orcs so near Water City's borders, and to do it so willingly, that was unusual indeed.